Do you have to paint a ceiling soon, but you're worried that you'll end up with a streaky finish that'll leave your ceiling looking worse than when you started? I'll show you the 3 tricks I use to avoid a streaky, uneven finish and how I end up with super clean ceilings every time, and no, it doesn't involve using a sprayer. I barely ever use those. Yo, what's crackin'? I'm Jeremy Vassar, a professional painter of over 20 years, and yes, I've painted more ceilings than I care to count. Let's start with the problem that shows up before you even roll anything, and it's one of the easiest to fix. All right, so the first little trick is to take your brush, get rid of that brush. Not literally, I'll come back to that in a minute. One of the most common issues I see on ceilings that don't look so good is where you have a lower ceiling where you've got direct light coming across the ceiling. It can be very easy to see where the ceiling was cut in with a brush and then rolled into with a roller. It's called picture framing, where the two are very obvious. And that can be very common in particularly more finicky ceiling paint. And the way that I've figured out how to remedy this particular issue is, instead of using a brush to do the perimeter cut in, is to use a 4-inch mini roller like this one. You can put this on an extension pole or just kind of stand and do it like you do a brush. If you roll the perimeter, what's nice is this nap is very similar to the nap that's going to be done on the rest of the ceiling, so the texture is going to be similar. And it doesn't matter usually if you're painting the ceiling, it's likely you're painting the walls. So it's okay if you get ceiling paint onto the wall, but you can just take the mini roller like this, cram it into the corner, and do the entire perimeter cut in. You will have to use a brush to cut in things in the interior of the ceiling, like a ceiling fan or lights or anything like that. But even after you do those cut-ins, you can take the mini roller and get super close to those cut-ins, so you only have like yay much that is actually that brushed looking finish. And then once all the cut-ins are rolled, then you can go ahead and roll into it with your larger roller cover. And then I've seen that work really well, particularly on more finicky paints that aren't like a dead flat, but that contributes to a really uniform looking finish. If you're painting some ceilings in your home, you might be painting some other things in there as well, which means you may be interested in our free online community called Paint Your Home Now. You can get all of my paint recommendations from major manufacturers, supply lists, top colors, and there's even a free mini course on painting front doors. You can also post your questions in the community and get them answered by professional painters like me and my brother, as well as some other experienced DIYers. If you want to dive a bit deeper, then we also have now available our all-in-one paint guide, which is a one-time purchase, and that is a very comprehensive course on how to paint the interior of your home. It's got quick start guides that'll get you going super quick, and then it's got a more in-depth painting fundamentals section that dives deeper into our process and our techniques. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can check the link in the description. So now that we've got the cutting in / picture framing issue addressed with our trusty mini roller, if you're using the wrong big roller for your job, then it's going to end up dragging on and you can end up with uneven coverage on your ceiling. This next tip fixes all that. All right, so one of the other big mistakes that I see on ceilings is lap marks. It's kind of one of the things people refer to as like a streaky looking ceiling, and that's where you can see when you use a roller, like you're overlapping lines, because the finish has been applied heavier in some spots, so you can see the overlap, and that's not what you want. And that happens a lot of times when people are using rollers like this, which are a 9-inch roller cover. Now, I've used these all the time on ceilings, particularly in smaller rooms. You can get a very even finish with this, but the issue is it doesn't hold all that much paint, so you end up having to do a lot of lines. So you just have to make sure that it's going on even every time. And the more lines you do, the more prone it's going to be to having lap marks. You might miss one. So instead of using a 9-inch roller cover, you can jump up to a much larger roller and roller frame. So some folks jump straight up to an 18-inch roller because it's twice as big as a 9-inch and it must be twice as good. But if you're not used to using those, they can be rather unwieldy and heavy. Also, the frame wraps both sides of the cover, so it can be kind of tricky to get it in tight into certain areas depending on how your ceiling's set up. So yeah, in a lot of cases, I've just found the 18-inch roller cover to be a bit too big. And then a couple years ago, we were working in with a carpenter, and he's like, hey, have you tried these 14s? And then we started trying them, and now they've become our favorite. We use these on a lot of the rolling that we do. So this is a 14-inch cover. This is a 9. As you can see, it's it's a good 5 inches, obviously, larger than the 9, so you get a decent amount more coverage. To me, this is like the Goldilocks zone for roller covers. You can load this thing up really well. You don't have to dip quite as much. And because it's wider than a 9-inch, you have less overlapping lines, so you're less prone to lap marks. And I get great results with using 14s. They're also not too unwieldy for like beginners or DIYers. If you're kind of used to using a 9, a 14 is not that big of a jump, but you'll go way quicker and it contributes to a much more even, uniform looking finish. So one of the issues that I see is that a lot of the time when people are rolling ceilings, either there's not enough light in the room or the overhead lights are on, and as they roll, the light is coming directly into their eyes as they're trying to, roll the ceiling out. Both those scenarios make it difficult to see what's going on with the paint coming off of the roller. So when I roll a ceiling, I like using lighting that's coming up from my perspective. So I'll cut off all the overhead lights so nothing's coming down in my eyeballs and blinding me as I'm trying to roll. And then recently we started using these work lights from Husky. They're LEDs so they don't overheat the room, but they have really good throw. So even if the ceiling's high up, it'll cast the light onto the ceiling. And particularly if you're using a couple of them, you can get a really good spread and it's much easier to see what's going on in the ceiling. And my other move is to use a flashlight clipped to my hat or a headlamp. And that way, you cut that on and I've got light going right where my eyeballs are going. And that way I get a concentrated beam of light that I can aim directly at the roller, which just makes it super easy to see what's going on, how the paint's coming off the roller, what the spread is like. But if you have really good lighting, either from a light on your hat or good lighting coming up from the ground, if you can actually see how the paint's coming off the roller, then you'll be able to tell if you have like heavier spots or lap marks or things like that. I know it sounds simple, but properly lighting a ceiling makes it an order of magnitude easier to get a better finish because you can actually see what's going on, particularly on coat number 2. And that's my painter tip for this section, is to do 2 coats. That helps a whole lot too. So now that you've got the ceiling nailed down, you want to make sure that you don't mess up your walls. We see these mistakes all the time, but they're super easy to fix if you know what to avoid. You can check that video out right over here. And until next time, take it easy, work smart, and have a good one. Peace.